Hello everyone, and welcome to a new potential series on this channel I like to call Draft Day Disaster. The series where we look back at a previous NHL entry draft, but instead of putting the most successful players at the top, we select the worst first round possible. In today's pilot episode, we are going to be taking a look at a draft class that has recently turned a decade old, as we turn the 2009 NHL entry draft into a draft day disaster. Before we use the gift of hindsight to turn this draft upside down, let me lay out the ground rules. Rather than starting conventionally with the first overall pick, who is normally the best player of the draft class, at least most of the time, this list shall start from the 30th overall pick, the last pick in the first round, where the best player of this bad bunch shall be selected. This means that the list shall count down, with each pick being slightly worse than the one before, until we reach the first overall pick, who will be crowned the worst player of this draft day disaster. Now, there are several factors that I've used to determine where each player should be placed on this list, and how one player was considered better or worse than the others in this fantasy draft to forget. These factors include original draft position. The higher a player was originally drafted, the higher the expectation for them to be a solid NHL player. After all, a first round pick never playing in the league is a lot worse than a third rounder never playing in the league. Number of NHL games and points scored. The more a player had, the lower they were likely to be drafted on this list, as they were deemed better than the other players who didn't play in the NHL, especially if a third rounder played more NHL games than a first or second rounder, for example. Number of AHL games and points scored. This was primarily used to differentiate players that never suited up in the NHL, of which there were many on this list, and of course the more a player had, the lower they were drafted. The AHL is considered the second best league in North America, with each team being affiliated with a big boy club, so draft picks will often spend time there if they aren't in the big league. And last, number of games played and points scored overall in their career. This was used as the final tiebreaker to separate one player from another, and obviously, the more games played or points scored, the better the player was considered. Whilst writing this video, I did consider only rearranging the picks in the first round of the draft, but since every other redraft under the sun takes players drafted in later rounds and inserts them into the first round, I thought it only fair that we do so here too. However, I made it so no player drafted after the third round in the actual 2009 entry draft was eligible for this list. Drafting 7th round picks in this list would have made this far too easy and a lot less interesting, let's be honest. And finally, no player that has played more than 100 NHL games is eligible for this list. They are considered slightly too good for this topsy-turvy draft. So now that we've got that all out of the way, let's get on with it, shall we? With the 30th selection of the 2009 NHL entry draft, instead of drafting Simone Dupré, the Stanley Cup champion Pittsburgh Penguins select Drew Shaw. Shaw was originally drafted 44th overall by the Florida Panthers and played 94 NHL games split over 5 seasons, with the Florida Panthers, the Calgary Flames and the Vancouver Canucks, scoring 26 points in the process. After leaving the NHL at the conclusion of the 16-17 season, Shaw has spent time in the Swiss National League, but now resides in the KHL with Cologne Red Star, where he has put up 8 points in 13 games at the time of this recording. I know what you're thinking, and yes, this is the best and most successful player on this list. I did try to warn you guys. Next, with the 29th pick in the draft, instead of picking Carter Ashton, who you might hear about a little bit later, the Tampa Bay Lightning select Stefan Elliott. Elliott was originally drafted 49th overall by the Colorado Avalanche and has gone on to play 84 NHL games over 7 seasons with 4 different teams, scoring 24 points during that span. Interestingly enough, Elliott has actually suited up in the NHL this season, as he has played 3 games for the Ottawa Senators and scored 1 point. So maybe there is still a chance the 28-year-old defenseman finds a full-time spot in the league after all. I mean, it's highly unlikely given his track record, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. With the 28th pick of the entry draft, instead of drafting Dylan Olsen, the Chicago Blackhawks select Jeremy Morin. Morin was originally drafted 45th overall by the Atlanta Thrashers and went on to play 82 NHL games over 5 seasons with the Chicago Blackhawks and the Columbus Blue Jackets, scoring 22 points in that span. Though he is currently playing for the Hershey Bears of the AHL, Morin's career post-NHL has seen him suit up in the KHL, the Finnish Liga, the ECHL and the Swiss National League. Looks like he's been clocking up those air miles in order to get him back to North America to play some hockey. Transatlantic flights aren't cheap, you know. Up next with the 27th pick, rather than drafting Philip Paradis, remember that name by the way guys, the Carolina Hurricanes select Matt Hackett. Hackett was originally drafted 77th overall by the Minnesota Wild and managed to make an NHL roster for 26 games over 4 seasons with the Minnesota Wild and the Buffalo Sabres, putting up a 4-17 record in that span. Hackett currently plays for the Coventry Blaze of Britain's elite ice hockey league and is putting up pretty awful numbers on a pretty disappointing team, so I think the NHL was right in not keeping him around for any longer than they did. With the 26th selection in the draft, instead of picking Kyle Palmieri, the Anaheim Ducks select Ben Hanowski. Originally taken 63rd overall by the Pittsburgh Penguins, Hanowski played in 16 NHL games over 2 seasons with the Calgary Flames and scored 3 points in that span. After a brief stint in the AHL, Hanowski has spent the last 4 seasons in the German DEL, where he currently plays for the Cologne Sharks and is actually putting up pretty decent numbers. So perhaps things all worked out for Big Ben. With the 25th selection in the draft, instead of drafting Jordan Caron, the Boston Bruins select Alexander Erbom. Erbom was originally drafted 73rd overall by the New Jersey Devils and went on to play 34 NHL games over 4 seasons, split between the Devils and the Washington Capitals, scoring 4 points in the process. After a season in the KHL in 14-15, Erbom returned to his home country of Sweden, where he has spent the past 4 years, 3 of which with Desjardins IF, which is the team he currently plays for. Next, with the 24th pick in the draft, rather than picking Marcus Johansson, the Washington Capitals select Philip Samuelsson. Having originally been drafted 61st overall by the Pittsburgh Penguins, Samuelsson suited up for 13 NHL games over 3 seasons with Pittsburgh and the Arizona Coyotes, scoring 0 points in that span. Since leaving the league, Samuelsson has spent the rest of his career bouncing around the AHL, where he currently plays for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. Seems like this Swedish-born American citizen was bitten by the North American hockey bug pretty bad. With the 23rd selection in the draft, rather than picking Tim Eriksson, the Calgary Flames select Landon Ferraro. Ferraro was drafted 32nd overall by the Detroit Red Wings and played in 77 NHL games over 5 seasons, split between the Red Wings, the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota Wild, scoring 12 points in that span. Since playing 2 games for the Wild last season, Ferraro has spent time playing for their AHL affiliate team, the Iowa Wild of the AHL. Up next, with the 22nd pick of the draft, rather than choosing Jordan Schroeder, the Vancouver Canucks select Chris Brown. No, not this guy, this guy. Brown was originally drafted 36th overall by the Phoenix Coyotes and played 23 NHL games over 5 seasons with the Coyotes and the Washington Capitals, scoring only 3 points. Brown currently resides in the DEL with the Nuremberg Ice Tigers, but looks to be on the injured reserve list. Well, at least he hasn't done what the other Chris Brown has done. With the 21st pick of the draft, instead of choosing John Moore, the Columbus Blue Jackets select Matt Clark. Originally drafted 37th overall by the Anaheim Ducks, Clark played 9 games in the NHL over 2 seasons with the Ducks and scored a single assist for his effort. After leaving the league, Clark spent several years in the AHL before moving to Europe, where he currently plays for the Vienna Capitals of the EBEL, where he has scored 15 points in 40 games. So at least his point production has picked up a little bit, right? Next, with the 20th selection of the draft, rather than picking Jacob Josephson, the New Jersey Devils select Jamie Devane. Devane was originally drafted 68th overall by the Toronto Maple Leafs and played a whole 2 games in the NHL with the Leafs, going scoreless in both outings. Since his stint in the NHL, Devane has spent the next 5 seasons in the AHL, where he currently plays for the Ontario Reign, the LA Kings affiliate team. With the 19th selection of the draft, instead of picking Chris Kreider, the New York Rangers select Jonas Nattinen. Originally drafted 65th overall by the Montreal Canadiens, Nattinen played just a single game in the NHL with the Habs in 13-14 and went scoreless in that game. Since making his NHL debut, Nattinen has played in the SHL, the Finnish Liga, and more recently in the KHL, where he currently plays for Neftahimik. Try saying that word 3 times quickly. With the 18th selection of the draft, instead of picking Louis LeBlanc, remember that name too, the Montreal Canadiens select Jesse Blacker. Blacker was originally drafted 58th overall by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but played his first and only NHL game with the Anaheim Ducks in 14-15, going scoreless in his debut. After suiting up for the Ducks, Blacker has spent time in the AHL, DEL and KHL, where he currently plays for Barras Astana and has scored 18 points in 48 games. Up next, with the 17th pick in the draft, rather than choose David Rundblad, the St. Louis Blues select Anton Rodin. Originally drafted 53rd overall by the Vancouver Canucks, Rodin wound up playing 3 NHL games with the team in 16-17 and scored 1 point during that span. Since his stint in the NHL, Rodin has suited up in the AHL before moving over to Switzerland to join HC Davos of the Swiss National League, where he has put up 12 points in 27 games this season. With the 16th pick of the draft, rather than choose Nick Leddy, the Minnesota Wild select Ethan Werrick. Werrick was originally drafted 47th overall by the New York Rangers and never played in the NHL. However, he has gone on to play 388 AHL games and score 144 points in the league since the draft, as well as scoring 323 points in 551 total games since being drafted. Werrick left North American hockey behind at the start of this season, as he is currently signed with HC Ocelari Trinek of the Czech League, where he has scored 19 points in 24 games. At the halfway point of this draft, we're starting to see the amount of NHL games played by each player drop off pretty quickly if they played any at all. But what we have already seen is nothing compared to what is coming. Begin the long list of career AHLers! With the 15th selection of the draft, instead of choosing Peter Holland, the Anaheim Ducks select Taylor Doherty. Originally drafted 57th overall by the San Jose Sharks, Doherty never suited up in the NHL, but he did play 257 AHL games and score 43 points, as well as play 581 total games with 202 points. Doherty also left North American hockey behind at the start of this season, as he currently plays for Billy Tigri Liberec of the Czech League, where he has put up 4 points in 42 games. With the 14th selection of the draft, rather than choosing Dmitry Kulikov, the Florida Panthers select Kenneth Ryan. Ryan was originally drafted 50th overall by the Toronto Maple Leafs and played in 247 AHL games, scoring 80 points, as well as playing in 490 total games with 285 points to date. Ryan is the 3rd straight player on this list to have left North America at the start of this season, as he joined HC Thurgau of the Swiss National League B. Next, with the 13th pick of the draft, instead of picking Zach Cassian, the Buffalo Sabres select Kevin Lynch. Originally drafted 56th overall by the Columbus Blue Jackets, Lynch never played in the NHL, but he has suited up in 154 AHL games and scored 37 points in that span, as well as playing in 497 total games and scoring 233 points. Lynch has spent the last 3 seasons with the Syracuse Crunch of the AHL, where he is currently on the injured reserve list. Strangely enough, Lynch hasn't played a single game this season, so he must have a pretty serious injury if he's been kept out for that long. With the 12th pick in the draft, rather than choose Calvin DeHaan, the New York Islanders select William Wren. Wren was drafted 43rd overall by the San Jose Sharks, and like the last few players on this list, never played in the NHL. He did play in 134 AHL games and scored 26 points, and he has played in 467 total games and scored 145 points. Wren is currently with the Wolfsburg Grizzlies of the DEL after brief stints in the Liga and KHL since leaving North America 2 seasons ago. With the 11th pick in the draft, instead of choosing Ryan Ellis, the Nashville Predators select Brett Ponich. Ponich was originally drafted 48th overall by the St. Louis Blues and has 134 AHL games with 12 points scored on his resume, as well as 427 total games with 94 points. Ponich is currently with the University of Alberta Augustana of the ACAC, where he has spent the last 3 seasons. Education is key, kids. Now we move into the top 10 worst picks from the top 3 rounds of the 2009 NHL Entry Draft. If you thought the players we have already covered were bad, you ain't seen nothing yet, buddy. Up next, with the 10th selection of the draft, instead of choosing Magnus Paajarvi, the Edmonton Oilers select Zach Budish. Originally drafted 41st overall by the Nashville Predators, Budish has played in 97 AHL games with 29 points in that span, but he has played in 511 total games with 327 points post-draft at the time of this recording. Budish has spent the last 3 years in the Finnish Liga, where he currently plays with TPS Turku. With the 9th selection of the draft, rather than pick Jared Cowan, the Ottawa Senators select Charles-Olivier Roussel. Roussel was originally drafted 42nd overall by the Nashville Predators and has played in 83 AHL games with 18 points during that span. Roussel has played in 452 total games post-draft with 230 total points. Having bounced back and forth between France and Canada the last few seasons, Roussel currently plays for Petrolier du Nord of the LNAH. With the 8th selection in the draft, instead of picking Scott Glennie, definitely keep this guy in mind, the Dallas Stars select Ryan House. House was originally drafted 74th overall by the Calgary Flames and went on to score 10 points in 59 AHL games and play 223 total games with 174 points. After taking a 6-year hiatus from playing hockey to try his hand at coaching in Prince George, House is currently back on the ice playing for the Fort St. John Flyers of the NPHL Senior. Not the typical journey of a 3rd round draft pick, but certainly a very interesting one. Next, with the 7th pick in the draft, rather than choose Nazem Kadri, the Toronto Maple Leafs select Igor Bobkov. Originally drafted 76th overall by the Anaheim Ducks, Bobkov played in 51 AHL games before returning to Russia's KHL in 15-16, where he currently plays for Avangard Omsk. Interestingly, Bobkov did sit on an NHL roster at several points over 2 seasons with the Ducks, but he never took to the ice and served as the team's backup goaltender. Hey, at least he got a glimpse of the league from the bench. I bet some of the players on this list would have killed for that opportunity. With the 6th pick in the draft, instead of choosing star defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the Phoenix Coyotes select Josh Burkholz. Burkholz was originally drafted 67th overall by the Florida Panthers and went on to suit up in only 4 AHL games, scoring no points in that span. Burkholz did play in 277 total games with 140 points to his name, but he seemingly left the sport of hockey for good 5 years ago, as he last played for the Cincinnati Cyclones of the ECHL during the 13-14 season. See, this list brings up all sorts of interesting stories, doesn't it, guys? We're down to the final 5 picks, and we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point, people. But I think you'll be surprised with how many first-round picks have made it this far up the list. With the 5th pick in the draft, instead of choosing Braden Shen, the Los Angeles Kings select Troy Hesketh. Originally drafted 71st overall by the Edmonton Oilers, Hesketh, strangely enough, never played in either the NHL or the AHL. He did play in 103 total games and scored 33 points split between the USHL and the NCAA 3, before seemingly calling it quits on playing professional hockey, as my research found that he last played for Hamline University in the 11-12 season. Whilst I'm sure he had his reasons, it's not very often that you hear of a 3rd round draft pick leaving the sport of hockey altogether only 2 years after he was drafted. With the 4th selection of the draft, instead of picking Evander Kane, the Atlanta Thrashers select Carter Ashton. Ashton was originally drafted 29th overall by the Tampa Bay Lightning and did make it to the National Hockey League for 54 games, where he scored 3 points. However, Ashton very clearly underperformed on his expectations, and after leaving North America once the 14-15 season ended, Ashton has spent the last 4 seasons in the KHL, where he currently plays for Severstal Sheripovets. Though he did play in the league, unlike many of the other players picked on this list before him, being a first-round pick and never living up to the expectations placed upon him is the primary reason why Carter Ashton is so high up on this list. A trend you'll see that follows in the next few picks on this list. With the 3rd overall pick in the draft, instead of choosing star center Matt Duchene, the Colorado Avalanche select Philip Paradis. Paradis was originally drafted 27th overall by the Carolina Hurricanes, and unlike Ashton before him, he never got the chance to play in the National Hockey League. Due to his disappointing play in the years following his draft, Paradis has spent much of his career in the AHL, took the year off in 16-17, and now plays for HDD Jesenice of the Slovenian League. Not exactly the career trajectory teams are looking for when they use their prime first-round pick, that's for sure. Penultimately, with the 2nd overall pick in the draft, rather than choose superstar defenseman Victor Hedman, the Tampa Bay Lightning select Louis LeBlanc. Originally drafted 18th overall by the Montreal Canadiens, LeBlanc played a grand total of 50 NHL games, all with the Canadiens, and scored an incredible 10 points in that span. After a brief 8-game stint with the Habs in 13-14, LeBlanc spent time in the AHL before leaving the league in 15-16. He then made a short-term move to the KHL, went on loan to a team in Slovakia, and finally moved to Lausanne HC of the Swiss National League, all in the span of 1 season. This turns out to be the last professional hockey LeBlanc has ever played in his career, as he hasn't suited up for a team in the 3 seasons since. Considering he was picked midway through the first round, to say that he underperformed is a huge understatement. And finally, last and certainly least, with the 1st overall pick of the 2009 NHL Entry Draft, instead of drafting superstar forward John Tavares, the New York Islanders select Scott Glennie. Glennie is the epitome of high potential turned bitter disappointment, as he was drafted 8th overall by the Dallas Stars and played a grand total of 1 NHL game. 1 NHL game! An 8th overall pick made it into an NHL lineup for just 1 whole game, and he didn't even score a goal or get an assist. After his 1-game stint with the Stars during the 11-12 season, Glennie spent the next 3 seasons in the AHL with the Texas Stars, took the year off in 15-16, came back to the AHL and played with the Manitoba Moose in 16-17, and seemingly called it a career after that, as he hasn't played professional hockey since. Going from one of the 10 best players of his draft class to a point-every-other-game player every year in the AHL, which began only 2 seasons after he was drafted, Scott Glennie, for one reason or another, seemed unable to take his success in the juniors with the Brandon Wheat Kings of the WHL and make it stick as he turned pro. Regardless of what that reason may be, he has certainly earned his spot at the top of this draft day disaster, and I'm sure the New York Islanders are glad that they didn't pick him over Tavares. Although Tavares isn't really doing much for them now, is he? And that's how you turn the 2009 NHL Entry Draft into a draft day disaster. What do you think about this redraft? Is it good, bad, or would you have ranked the players differently? Also, what do you think about this as a series on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. A big thank you to Chris Gadsby, Kalesbro, Max Artis, and Nat Marlowe, as well as a huge thank you to Ryan Todd for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.